First, I want to thank you, Professor Glaude, for joining me on the Intercept Live today. How are you today, sir?
I'm really good. I really appreciate, always enjoy having a conversation with you. And by the way, I'm not a professor of political science. I'm a professor of religion and African-American studies.
That's right.
I just like to talk about politics.
Yeah, and as I said it, as soon as it came out of my mouth, I realized, you know what, he's not in the field of political science. I'm so accustomed to talking to political science professors, but then even when you and I discuss, we've yet to have a conversation about religion and your actual field of study. But every time we discuss and have a conversation, we always have to discuss either some tragic news or things that are happening in the world around us, particularly in politics.
Right.
And so I wanted to give you, I wanted to hear from you first. There's so many topics happening right now, so many issues happening right now, from Michael Slager and Walter Scott, and also with the Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and even now with the tragic killing of 15-year-old Jordan Edwards. I mean, it's so unfortunate, but it seems to be true that once one case happens, once one thing happens, it seems to come over and over and over again. What are you feeling this week with all of these issues that are happening all at once?
Well, it lets us know that, the policing regime that defined the last couple of years of President Obama's term is still operative. It's still affecting the life chances of our young folk, life chances of people of color, black people in particular, all throughout the country. So you can't imagine, for example, a police officer in the suburbs of Dallas using a rifle to shoot in the car of a kid full of white kids. And the fact that Jordan Edwards was shot in the head because of, I think, just some operating assumptions about black folk. And then for the police officer to lie, and then to be discovered lying and only get fired as opposed to being arrested. Right. And then when you combine that with what is the Department of Justice's refusal to indict and proceed with attempting to prosecute the police officers who killed Alton Sterling, it gives us a sense, an indication, Brother Benjamin, that we have a lot of work to do, that we must continue to bring pressure to bear if we're going to change the policing regime in this country. But we need to understand that work will have to happen under different conditions.
Absolutely. And in the case of Jordan Edwards, the 15-year-old, he's being described by his family as an honor student, beloved by his school. The officer who has been identified in fire, Roy Oliver, has been with the police department since 2001. And you're right. One of the things that jumped out first to me in this issue, Professor, is the fact that he felt so comfortable to falsify this police report, even in the presence of a dash cam or a body cam in this case. That speaks to me to the culture, a level of comfort, willing to take that chance to falsify this report, knowing that we will see, or at least some officials will see, the video that contradicts what he said, ultimately leading to the death of a 15-year-old child. What does that say about the culture in terms that they're just comfortable in this kind of situation?
Well, it says that they don't expect to be held accountable. They don't expect to be held responsible, that they can engage in the use of force and the wanton breaking the law at any time they want to. They can treat American citizens in any way they want to, and they could feel that they will not be held accountable, that they are in fact not protectors of us, but can be protected in their own lawlessness. And I think it's part of the effect of all of the mass movement that we had over the last few years, that the police chief came out so quickly. Once the tape was revealed, and fired the officer. But it seems to me that he should be arrested because we have ample evidence and we have a dead child. And this is part of the issue that we have to address. And it seems to me.
Speaking of the Chief of Police Haber, he said on Monday, he said that he unintentionally and incorrectly said the vehicle was backing down the road. And according to the video, the vehicle was moving forward as the officer approached. After reviewing the video, I do not believe that the shooting met our core values. So not only was the police officer willing to falsify this, but the police chief came out very quickly to confirm and to co-sign what the police officer said, and he had to subsequently backtrack from that. But you said something that's very key here. He violated the department's procedures enough to get fired. Where is that threshold then for him to get arrested? Because if he violated procedures enough to get fired, surely now he should be at least vulnerable to some type of charge.
Right, especially since we have a dead child.
Yeah.
Right, and this is really important, Benjamin. I mean, it's one thing for us to talk about the fact that Jordan Edwards was a great kid, that he excelled in school, that everyone thought of him as a good citizen of the community, that he was a part of a very tight-knit family. Yeah. It's one thing to kind of describe him in that way. But if Jordan Edwards was not those things, right? If he had a juvenile record, if he was a kid that was prone to be in trouble, the fact that the police officer broke every rule, the fact that the police officer lied, the fact that the police officer took his life, it still obtains. Yeah. So it's not a matter of us focusing on whether or not the kid was good or not. It's a matter of us focusing our attention on the fact that you have a police officer who has the legitimate right to use deadly force, right? Just engaged in a wanton act of murder, in my view. And we need to call it for what it is. But it's going to be very difficult to do that under the circumstances of a DOJ who's run by Jeff Sessions, I think, who is in so many ways a person that I would describe as being deeply, profoundly racist, and someone who's trying to backtrack on all of the agreements that were made with police departments found to have deep-seated biases, deep-seated problems in their training. And for him to pull back on these notions, on these agreements, and you see the refusal, right, to indict the cops, the police officers who killed Alton Sterling. We have the conditions for the continuation of mass movement, of mass pressure, because if not, we're going to continue to see what we've just witnessed and participate in this haunting ritual of grieving over the death of another loved one in public.
And speaking of Alton Sterling, out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the Justice Department announced this week that they are not pressing charges. They haven't found sufficient evidence to press a civil rights violation against the two police officers involved in that shooting. And ironically, immediately after I got that notification, I got a notification saying that the Justice Department was going to charge the activist from Code Pink who interrupted Jeff Sessions' confirmation hearings. And so we have this stark contrast of priorities here in the United States, where we're now cracking down, even if it's in the purview of discretion, they're cracking down on dissent. But then we have this gaping hole when it comes to Black lives and police brutality, where we are not addressing the fundamental issue. It seems as though, Professor, the hurdle is too high, or it's just insurmountable in terms of a civil rights violation from the Justice Department. So what do we do now? I mean, if we can't get justice from the federal government, historically we've always had problems getting justice from the state government. What do we do as a community and as a nation?
Well, I think we just got to continue to bring pressure to bear. We have to understand the deep-seated problems in the criminal justice system, and understand that those problems are not going to be resolved by the criminal justice system as it is. So even though we have these extraordinarily horrific instances, and we have to use the law as our channel to address these extraordinarily horrible incidences, we can't go in with the understanding that the criminal justice system, that the law will resolve the matter. We have to. I think we need to have a bigger and more comprehensive understanding of the nature of transformation that needs to happen. It often puzzles me when we think that appeal to the law will resolve the fundamental bias in the law. I think we need to be a little bit more careful there. You know, it's like saying that incarcerating people more, throwing more people in jail will solve the problem. When in fact, I think the fact of incarceration itself is problematic. So I think we need to be really, really careful as we try to hold these police officers accountable, as we try to hold Jeff Sessions accountable, that we also offer a systemic critique of how the law functions on behalf of the property class, how the law functions on behalf to maintain the status quo, and how we have to begin to think carefully about how the very notion of criminal justice in this country allows for and perpetuates deep-seated inequalities that sustain those inequalities in this place.
Yeah, you're hitting on something there that strikes to the core of the issue. From my vantage point, it's a systemic level problem that we're facing. Right. And I wanted to get your feedback on the case of Walter Scott and Michael Slager, particularly with this undue fear, or this level of fear that is used as a justification in so many cases. The officer feared for his life. The officer feared this person. The officer thought this guy was a bad guy. So many different cases where we hear this type of language justifying their actions based on fear. But even historically, that fear is a part of the system, right? They've utilized fear and the vilification of blackness to justify a certain level of treatment of African Americans. So if on one hand, Professor, we're addressing this systemically, what about those intangible things? What about that undue fear that is permeates the policing agencies?
Oh, absolutely. It's a fear that not only permeates the policing agency, it's a fear that permeates the legislative branch. It's a fear that permeates the executive branch at the state, local, county, and at the national level. So, and it's a fear that goes all the way back to slavery, right? It's a fear that's evidenced in Thomas Jefferson's notes when he's afraid of divine retribution for the sin of slavery, the fear of Toussaint L'Ouverture and Dessalines, the fear of black rage and black revenge. It gets translated into a fear of black criminality. You know, we're all walking bigger Thomases, as it were, as if we were all kind of prone to criminal behavior, whether it's because we grow up in a culture of pathology or because we're by nature criminal. And these kinds of assumptions and stereotypes inform the very ways in which police, whether they're black or white or brown, right, how they police our communities. And it becomes very interesting with the Slager case and the Michael Slager and Walter Scott case. I'm really interested to see the nature of the plea deal. Yeah, I want to see what kind of time this guy gets, because he in some ways he's pleaded guilty to violating the civil rights of Walter Scott. The trial was hung, and I want to see how much time the judge gives him. And I think this is where we will begin to see very clearly the blatant hypocrisy at the heart of the criminal justice system. And in order for us to uproot the fears, in order for us to change the systemic problems, we're going to have to call attention to it. We're going to have to call attention to it when it evidences itself. And we should say this very clearly. All these police officers who are talking about they're afraid of a 12-year-old Tamir Rice. They're afraid of Walter Scott. They're afraid of Jonathan. They were afraid for their lives. Turn out in most instances that they're lying. Then you have to ask yourself, what the hell are you doing being a police officer if you're that afraid?
Come on, man. Yeah.
I mean, what the hell are you doing? And then we're going to give you a gun?
Absolutely.
You're going to have the opportunity to engage in the legitimate use of deadly force. Then you don't need to be a police officer if you're that afraid. And so I think it's important for us to kind of just simply, speak the truth. Just tell it like it is in these moments, Yeah.
You spoke volumes there, because that's just one of the first questions I always ask is, if you're that afraid, why are you a police officer? Because you're going to be constantly put in situations where you have to make judgment calls, snap calls based on snap judgment based on your worldview, based on your experience, and based on the level of fear. If you roll into a scene and you see a 12-year-old boy and your first instinct is to be afraid of them, then to me, Professor, you're not qualified to be a police officer in the United States of America. But we see this time and time and again. We put guns in the hands of men and women who have this level of fear, these preconceived notions, and they take it directly into the job. So speak to us on how do we strategically change this? What do we target? What do we address when we protest, when we go to the city council, when we speak to our mayor? What do we say to affect that type of change?
Well, the one thing we need to do is we need to make sure we have district attorneys who will prosecute these cops. Yeah. Right. We need to make sure that there's a level of accountability. That's to say that if you have the authority to utilize deadly force, if you have that authority and it is revealed that you have broken the law in the exercise of that force, then there's a special set of rules that apply to you in terms of prosecution. Mm-hmm. Right. We need police officers to be very clear about the consequences of their actions. Right. And that, I think, starts at the level of who will bring charges, who will indict them. And this, again, is not me having undue faith in the criminal justice system. It's just me saying that if we're going to try to make an intervention at the level of the immediacy of our interface with police officers, we need to have DAs who are there ready to bring the stick down, to bring the hammer down on these police officers who behave in such a way. And then we also need to be very create those kinds of mechanisms to make police precincts transparent. Mm-hmm. I mean, think about all the things that we've learned. We've learned about the emails in the San Francisco Police Department, all the racist emails there. We've witnessed a man just coming home from work and a police officer coming up to him and grabbing him by the neck and body slamming. And for what? We don't know. We've seen them do that to children. Just recently, the video footage that's gone viral of a 14-year-old, Benjamin, a 14-year-old sitting in a chair. We don't know what he did prior to, but he was just sitting in the chair. And a grown man comes into the office, puts him in a chokehold, tries to walk him away from the camera, body slams him, knocks his teeth out, and then another grown white man puts his hand on his head. They handcuff him and then lift him up by his arms. It's a 14-year-old, a child. And the question is, how is it that as a country, white, black, brown, yellow, all of us, how is it that we're not outraged? Yeah. The reason is because we presume that these black children, right, are by definition, or black people or black adults are by definition criminal. And so we have to attack it at the level of culture as well. So by way of summary, we got to have DAs who are willing to prosecute. We got to be transparent about the practices of police precincts. And we have to, in some ways, speak to the deep-seated cultural logics of how black men and women are represented in popular culture as by definition criminal, as by definition dangerous. Whether you have a suit on or whether your pants are sagging, you are subject to this kind of violence. It just varies to degree. And frequency.
There's an article in The Intercept, or on The Intercept's website today, that discusses some of the things that you mentioned by Alice Sperry. Killer cop conviction is an exception, and don't expect justice from Sessions Department of Justice. And I think you hit it on the head in terms of what this plea deal is actually going to bear out with Michael Slager. But in so many cases, Professor, we don't get justice. We're just on the 25-year anniversary of the LA riots with Rodney King. And from that point, you know, at least in my lifetime, that was a flashpoint to realize how unjust this justice system can be. Where do we go for justice? I mean, and I know that sounds like a big question, but for people who are a lofty question, rather, but for people who are frustrated, if we can't get justice from our Department of Justice, whether it's Trump's Department of Justice or Obama's, what do we do?
Absolutely. Well, I think what we have to do, and this is really important, Benjamin, we have to understand that the quest for just policing, that the arguments around abolition of prisons, that we have to link this up with a broader progressive vision. And this is why it's so important in this moment of political turmoil that progressive voices out there understand the inextricable connection between economic realities and racial realities, to understand the deep-seated ties, right, between economic inequalities and racial inequalities. Not to talk about these things as if they're separate, but to understand that a real, genuine progressive vision in this country has to finally has to finally how can we say, bridge the chasm between workers and race, and begin to talk about this, right, as intimately linked. Otherwise, we will find ourselves, as James Baldwin said, right? James Baldwin said in, I think, Uses of the Blues, he said, America is like a monstrous minstrel show. The same old songs, the same old dance, the same old jokes. So if we have a progressive voice that's not speaking to the ways in which race overdetermines how class is experienced in this country, if we don't have a progressive voice doing that, then that progressive voice will only end up reproducing a society where black men and boys, black women and girls will be subject to unjust violence, to horrible violence, and we will find ourselves over and over again mourning our dead in public while white liberal sentimentality says, oh, look how bad it is for them, and nothing changes. Nothing changes. So we need a progressive vision around race and the economy, both together, and that will speak to the fundamentals of policing and the fundamentals of justice in this country.
Professor, I want to hold that conversation there and leave your last word where it stands. But in the middle of this conversation, I realized that you and I actually do have an opportunity for the first time to talk about religion between the two of us because of this religious executive order, two parts, right? The executive order that conservative Christians wanted to get today, and the executive order that they actually got. So for those in the audience who may not have watched the news, there was an executive order signed by President Trump on today that essentially loosens the enforcement of the Johnson Amendment, which separates the church's ability to endorse political parties or to be outright political. Professor, I just have to know, what do you think about that piece of that executive order, rather?
Well, as part of President Trump delivering for the white evangelicals who voted for him at 81%. He's already done it with Judge Gorsuch, and now he's doing it with this executive order. I think many of the white Christian evangelicals were trying to get him to embrace the kind of religious freedom language that came out of Mississippi and Georgia. But he hasn't quite gone that far. But what we see is an attempt to consolidate political power, right, by in some ways blurring the lines of church and state, that will enable a certain kind of Christian voice. Remember, a certain kind of Christian voice to enter the body politic. And this is really important because we know that white Christian evangelicals are witnessing a substantive, they flatlined in terms of their growth. That we know that their numbers that their trend lines are not upward, that in fact we see their numbers are going to shrink. They're standing still right now, but young people are beginning to leave, that in some ways the heyday of the Christian right is in the past. And so I think this is part of this last ditched effort. Much of what the Trump presidency is about, and this is just one example of it, is this last-ditch effort to hold on, right, to power, to insinuate their vision of the world into the order of things, because they know their world is dying. They know it's dying. And so this is just the latest example of it, brother. It's just the latest example. Let
me drill down on something that you identified right away. It's a certain type of Christian voice. And Donald Trump, in his comments, he said that, I know that you're going to say good things, right? He has no problem with this because he knows that audience is going to say good things. What do you think Trump and the IRS, who's charged with enforcing this, what do you think they're going to do when a Jeremiah Wright comes around the corner and says the chickens are coming home to roost, and not God bless America, but goddamn America? Do you think they're going to be able to hold on to this executive order, or do you think they'll quickly retreat?
Brother, we know these hypocrites. You know, we know these people are blatant hypocrites. They don't care. They will tell you one thing, and it applies to one group of people, and the very same principle, when applied to another group of people, just simply doesn't hold. We've seen this from Mitch McConnell. We've seen it from Paul Ryan. We've seen it from the Department of Justice. We've seen it in relation to how they will prosecute protesters and how they won't prosecute police officers who are murderers. So this is not unusual. We see it, you know, in the USA Today. They're talking about President Obama may lose his pension. Congress may come after his pension because he gave a speech for $400,000 at Wall Street. Now, I disagree. I'm critical of President Obama delivering that speech at Wall Street. It actually reveals his stripes. It shows who he actually is. But the idea that Jason Chaffetz is now going to go after him when only two other presidents, I think it was Carter and Truman, didn't do what all the other presidents including Obama, have done and is doing, just shows you the blatant hypocrisy. So if you hear Jeremiah Wright or you hear a progressive pastor, Otis Moss III, you hear Freddie K. Haynes, you hear folks coming out bringing the full power of a prophetic church witness, Christian witness, to bear on social issues. They're going to cry church and state immediately. They're going to try to take away their tax exempt status. We know it. Absolutely. They're hypocrites.
Absolutely.
There's no fundamental principle. This is the fundamental principle. The principle is, how do they maintain control of power? Right. That's it. Nothing else matters. And when we understand that Machiavellian orientation, then we know who we're dealing with. And we need to stop pretending that it's otherwise.
And actually, there's nothing else to add to that. Professor Glaude, chair of the Center for African American Studies and the William S. Todd Professor of Religion and African American Studies at Princeton University. I figured since I didn't get it right the first time, I would get it in its totality the second time around. Thanks so much for joining me. We definitely want to have you back anytime that you're available.
Always, always. And take care of yourself and keep doing this work, Doc.
Absolutely will. Thanks so much.